Rachel Reeves' ambition knows no limits so long as you're only measuring negative figures. There was no ambition in this budget at all. There was nothing coherent about what she had to say. There was no plan. There was no policy that she was delivering. There was no economic coherence to this whatsoever. This was just something that she put together to try to appease three audiences. One was the city, and so far she seemed to have kept them, roughly speaking, on side. Although I've had so many furious emails from business commentators telling me how terrible it all is since it's happened. The second was Labour backbenchers, and frankly, anything which wasn't truly dire was going to keep them happening. Yeah, if it was terrible, that was okay, but dire was probably going to be off limits, and it was not good, but it wasn't dire, so they are for the moment happy. And the third audience was you and me and everybody who's listening to this, those who are going to vote for Labour or will not be voting for Labour in the future. And for them, this was a just non-event budget. There was no ambition. There was no change. There's no consequence unless, and there is one good change in there, unless you have three children and you can claim benefits for the third child. But thereafter, and remember, even then, there can be a cap on total benefit payments. So don't be too optimistic about getting everything as a consequence of the removal of the two-child benefit cap, because some people have been over optimistic. But otherwise, this was a terrible budget. And I've listened to them for 50 years now, which is kind of sad. I've just realized I first watched or read about a budget in 1975, I reckon, when I was in the sixth form. And here I am, still doing the same thing. And this ranks up there with some of the worst. It was that bad. The great problem with council tax is, first of all, it's based upon 1992 values, which makes it ridiculous. Secondly, the problem was not the top end. I mean, 145,000 houses in the UK, almost all in the southeast of England, a few in Manchester, that's about it, will be paying some more council tax as a result. But in my opinion, the big problem with this whole tax is that people on benefits now pay it, and they didn't used to. And so we have got this grossly unfair tax, which creates an incredible tax burden on those on the lowest income. Which she did nothing to address. So she did not deal with the issue there. Did she increase tax on wealth? She increased the tax rate on investment income by 2%. Let's be clear. But people who work for a living pay, most of them, pay 8% national insurance. I happen not to, because I'm old enough to now be beyond that. But the vast majority do until you are of a certain age. You've got to be an old age pensioner, and I am. And then there's also the employer's national insurance contribution of 13%. So the combined national insurance rate is 21.5% or something at the moment. And the new tax she's put onto investment income is 2%. This is not much of a move in the right direction when there was a lot to do. Where else were they shouting? Look, yeah, they were delighted on the Labour backbenchers about the removal of the two-child benefit cap. But remember, it's only a year ago, just over a year ago, that, was it 7 Labour MPs were suspended because they actually voted for that? I mean, come on. This was dragged out of Rachel Reeves. It's not something that she did by conviction or anything else. She made it into something that was a symbol, a totemic symbol of Starmerism, that she was going to penalise children in this way. And we didn't see an end to the bedroom tax, which is another iniquitous tax from the Tory era. So there were no real issues in here for Labour MPs to celebrate. They might feel they've got a reprise until next May, when the public send them to oblivion. And will send Starmer and Reeves to oblivion, I expect. But there's nothing good about this. And beyond them, I don't know who's really celebrating. Well, first of all, I want to know who it is who can afford to put £20,000 a year into their ISA anyway. Because not many people I've ever known can do that. And I was a practicing chartered accountant for a long time, and I represented very few clients how to spare 20 grand after meeting the household bills and paying the mortgage and putting some money into a pension and paying off their student debt if they had anything and everything else. So we are already talking about something which is only of relevance to the wealthy, most of whom are older. ISA arguments are always about that. Arguments about expensive properties are always about that. The restriction on the salary sacrifice scheme, I'll get that right in a moment, for pensions, is again one of those silly ones. £2,000 a year is not a phenomenally big pension contribution. For somebody on 40,000 a year, it's quite possible to pay in 5% of your salary into a pension if you're to have a hope of something like a reasonable outcome by the time you reach retirement age. So that is not unreasonable. But she restricted pensions there. But what she didn't do was remove the innocuous subsidy for people who pay 40% tax, who get double the rate of tax relief on their pension contributions that those on basic rate tax get, which is just totally unfair. And that value of that subsidy is around 28 billion going to the wealthiest people in the country. And now what could you do with 28 billion if you gave everybody a level playing field when it came to pensions, which was simply to say we all get tax relief at 20%. That's it. We would have 28 billion left over. If she actually just removed ISA reliefs, which simply go to subsidise the city, by the way, they don't actually produce any constructive money for investment in the UK economy, despite all the claims that the city make. And all the money in cash ISAs, by the way, is just dormant because banks don't need bank deposits to be able to lend money. That's not how the system works. Then that's another 10 billion of money thrown away, subsidising the most inefficient private sector business in the UK, which is banking. And that's what we do. And so this is economic folly. And you're absolutely right. This is biased. All the time we hear about the interests of the wealthy. But the wealthy are older people. By and large, they look like I do. The hairline is receding. The hair is grey. And they've been listening to budgets for 50 years. And, that's the market that she's playing to. And I'm not interested in that. I happen to still feel I'm in my 30s. It's not true, but I feel that way. And I plan to work for another 20 years. So I'm not in that mindset. But she clearly is only playing to this retired, fairly right-wing, fairly reform-orientated group in society who've got wealth, don't know what to do with it, but demand their rights to go with it. And the young aren't there, and she doesn't count them. The freezing of the tax threshold, first of all, is not going to have an impact for another 2 or 3 years because they were already frozen. And we should name the man who's responsible for that. It isn't Rachel Reeves. It is a man on this occasion, and it's Rishi Sunak who created this policy in 2021. So let's blame the person who actually put this in motion. But he didn't anticipate that they would be fixed for a decade, which is quite extraordinary. The value of tax reliefs will have gone down by then by about a third because of inflation. The change in the next year is going to be worth around £100 of extra tax for every household involved. So will they be better off by having the child benefit for the third child? Yes. Will they lose if they are in work? And most people who claim child benefit are in work, of course. Most people who claim benefits are in work, of course, because benefits are just a direct subsidy to employers who do not pay enough to their employees. That's the way the system works. Hello, I'm looking at you, Tesco. I'm looking at you, Lidl. I'm looking at you, Sainsbury, and the entire hospitality industry of the UK and a few others besides. You are the people who are getting the benefit of this subsidy, and that's very clear. But the point about it is that she is penalising those on low pay the most, and we're going to have a massive problem. And here we do have a problem with people with my grey hair. And that is that actually next year, the personal allowance will be almost exactly the same as the state old age pension. Near enough £12,500 each. And therefore, a lot of people who make a little bit of extra money as a pensioner, and we're not talking just about savings, because you have to have £1,000 of savings a year before you pay savings interest a year before you pay tax on it. But we're talking about people who make any other odds and ends. They could find themselves in a very desperate and difficult position of actually having to do tax returns, make declarations, having tax bills, many of which they won't have anticipated and which will come out of the blue and they won't have budgeted for, because unlike those who can put £20,000 a year aside into their ISA, most pensioners have the square root of not a lot, I'll be polite here, with regard to savings. I could mention here a shameless plug for my alternative budget, and I'm going to make a shameless plug for my alternative budget, which I published in 11 installments over the last couple of weeks on my blog, and which is now available as a free download from the download shop, as we call it, on my website, Funding the Future. And quite a lot of people have actually downloaded it. It's 64 pages of alternative. My budget is biased to the poor. Let's be blunt about it. It's not biased against wealth, it's biased to the poor. I'm not against wealth, but I am definitely wanting to protect people. So we should have had a redistributive budget. And the fact is, that doesn't mean we need a wealth tax. I mean, I know Gary Stevenson is incredibly keen on that. I know lots of people are. But as a practicing chartered accountant of old, I know how difficult it is to agree the value of wealth and how hard it is, therefore, to actually put a wealth tax in place. Wealth taxes don't fail because of the idea, they fail because of the practice. So, what could she have done? She could have equalised capital gains tax rates and income tax rates. Incredibly simple thing to do, a few lines of programming on the tax return, and she would have raised £12 billion a year. She could have used that to redistribute money to those who are on the lowest income. She could not just have ended the two-child poverty cap. She could have ended the bedroom tax. She could have increased the personal allowance to $15,000 a year and put in place a comfortable margin for everyone who's stressed about additional taxes, pensions, and those on low pay and who do need this. She could have prevented that going to higher rates as well, by the way, and I would have been happy if she would have done. She could have put VAT on bank and other financial services charges, because they are basically levied on the wealthy, because nobody else buys financial services. Unless you've actually got money, you don't buy financial services. And so actually she could have charged VAT on those. They're exempt at present, which is quite absurd. They're not essential public services. They are about wealth management, and the benefit would have been £8 billion a year. And if she had, instead of raising the tax on investment income by 2%, instead put in place what I would like, which is what is technically called an investment income surcharge, which means you pay an extra 15% tax on your gains and income over 10,000 a year derived from non-work sources, that could have raised 18 billion. There you go. I've just found her something like 38 billion quid. And if we changed the rules on pensions and ISAs so that the money that went into every ISA and a quarter of all the money that goes into pensions a year, at a combined total cost of subsidies to the state of 80 billion a year, that's how much we spend subsidizing the wealthy. If the condition had been attached to that money should have been invested in productive investment in the UK economy that not only created jobs, but a Green New Deal and rebuilt hospitals and provided us with the infrastructure we needed and everything else, that could have released 100 billion a year for investment. Imagine what you could do with 100 billion a year for investment, plus 38 billion, which I've just very easily found with three very simple measures using the existing tax return and existing financial systems to ensure that we could deliver a real distribution from the wealthy to the poorest in our society, and we would get growth as a result, because the wealthy don't spend their money. That's the definition of saving. It's putting money aside because you don't want to spend it. Well, if you don't spend it, it doesn't create any value within the economy, and it isn't lent back into the economy, and your pension is saved in second-hand shares, as I call it. If you or your pension fund buy shares in Marks and Spencer's, Marks and Spencer's haven't issued shares for decades, as far as I'm aware. You buy a second-hand share. It doesn't add value, and Marks and Spencer's don't get a penny to invest, and nor do almost any of the large companies your pension fund will be saved in. So none of this money is productive. I want to turn money into a productive asset to create real jobs for real people, to produce real wealth, which would actually transform our economy. Sorry, I'm getting it a bit passionate here. Let's be honest, what are we talking about? More pollution. Because if you build another road, you're going to get more carbon output. I mean, is that really beneficial? Is that the answer to our problem at the moment? I question that. Very soon, she's going to announce the details of the Secret Santa at the Treasury Christmas party, because the scale of the things she was announcing was so small, so inconsequential, and also trampled all over the rights of the Scottish and Welsh governments as well, because she just said, we're going to do this there, and that should be for them to decide, and I take some offense at that. But she was doing all these things which were so inconsequential and so small, you just wondered, is she actually just managing the petty cash? Now, she always says she learned how to manage the budget at her mother's kitchen table, but it feels as though her thinking hasn't gone far beyond dealing with the small stuff. She should have been talking about the big stuff, is what I say. I'm not being anti-Sheen, but this was a campaign I got involved with in a previous iteration. This system was abused previously by the UK Channel Islands. You might remember that they used to ship goods literally from the UK to the Channel Islands to ship them back again without VAT, which was just so bonkers. They even left the UK pre-packaged in envelopes to be stamped with a stamp in Guernsey or Jersey to be sent back at one time. It was so abusive. Now they've done it from China. These things are abusive. They've gone, that's great. Can I mention another one I'm really pleased about? She's going to charge private equity partners to income tax on their profits rather than capital gains. At long last, you might say. There are a few people amongst the wealthy elite who are actually going to be paying proper tax as a consequence of this. That has taken a decade or more of campaigning to win. I mean, I wouldn't stop the tax rates in the UK at 45%. I think I would be looking at least 50% on incomes over 200 grand a year. So I would be upping the tax rate on them. Mysteriously, one thing that was trail, which was that she was going to charge employers national insurance on the profits of partners in very large law and accountancy firms, did not happen. So they got the lobbying in, I presume, and said they were all going to leave the UK. I'm not sure we'd really notice in terms of value added to the economy, given how badly our audit industry fails so often, where it's the only industry I know where they treat paying fines as a normal cost of business. They're so bad at doing audits these days. And lawyers, what do? Spend their time trying to abuse the law at the level we're talking about. I spent half my life in a coffee shop. And most of the coffee shops I know, I don't have to order, and they know it's going to be a black Americano. And if I change the order, they'd all die of shock, I think. So I really love the hospitality sector, and I like a lot of the people who work in it, and I know a lot of people in that sector. They did not have a great day. They did get some tax relief for business rates. So the smaller hospitality sector got some tax relief with regard to business rates. It didn't sound as generous as the announcement was trying to make it out to be, as far as I could work out, but it's better than nothing. But if you're a part of a chain, it probably has no impact. The increase in the minimum wage, look, I haven't got a problem with increasing the minimum wage because, frankly, it's pretty hard to live on the minimum wage. Let's be blunt about it these days. And that's because we have a system that extracts at least 50% of the net earnings of people on minimum wage by way of rent. And whilst we have an abusive economy of that sort, then the minimum wage needs to be higher than it is. And that's my answer to the right wing who say it's too high. But that doesn't help the hospitality sector. The hospitality sector is having difficulty. What is the answer for the hospitality sector, which I do think is fundamentally important to well-being? Because the publicity goes to the high-end hospitality sector. But one of the reasons why I like working in coffee shops is I watch the world go by. And I see those people, pensioners, who, for example, go out and have a cup of tea. And this for them is one of the highlights of their week. This is not their fancy meal out. This is just an opportunity to go out and meet a friend or even talk to their husband and wife or whoever it might be and just celebrate being alive in a different environment. It's a treat. And boy, do we need treats on occasions. And this failure to understand the importance of that is, I think, quite important. Would I change the VAT rate on hospitality as a result? I think that's where we might need to look at something. After all, we did do this after COVID. We did it a little bit around 2008-9. We could reduce the VAT rate on hospitality. And the reason why is that it is so important to human interaction. And so much of this economy and so much of this debate around the budget is all about finance and numbers and technicalities and wealth. But I do really worry about the people who simply go out, who just need somewhere to meet their friends, to sit and talk because they're living in rented accommodation, which is really small. And I've seen the average student room in London of late. It's not great. It's pretty dire, in fact. There's no room to host anyone at home. You haven't even got a shared kitchen space you can have friends around to. You need this sort of thing to live. So that's what worries me. And my move would be to actually look at, can we change the pricing? Because it would ease inflation, and that's good. It would help a sector which has lost 80 to 100,000 jobs over the last year, which is good because those jobs are mainly for young people. And then the government wonders why it's got so much youth unemployment. And it is basically it's a gateway. I almost call it a gateway drug to employment. Because so many people, I had a chat with somebody this week. I'll name her, Noya. She's great. She's a barista and she's starting a new job in the new year. And she was so excited that she's actually leaving her job as a barista. Now, she's not knocking being a barista, But she didn't want to be a barista when she graduated, and now she's got her real job. She's got something she wanted to do. And so, in that sense, it's a place where you learn the ropes of the discipline of work after being at school or college or university. You get used to servicing the public and all their grumpiness, and boy, are some of them grumpy. And some of them are just downright horrible. And you see that in these places too. Everything from racism onwards is on display when you look at what happens inside your average coffee shop. And then you get to where you want to go because you can prove you've got the discipline and you've got a reference. So the hospitality sector is actually really, really important for young people as this way to transition from. I mean, not for everybody. If you've got a physics degree from Cambridge, you'll probably get a job on 100,000 a year in the city, no problem. But if you talk about most people who've got a degree in marketing from Leicester or Loughborough or Lincoln, I'm going around universities with L's in the name for some reason there, don't know why. But one of the Leeds, chuck in a few more, but whatever it might be, Liverpool, God, I'll shut up now. The point is, those people might well need this opportunity. And that's why I'm in favor of trying to help hospitality, as well as the fact I like black Americanos. Double shot, sometimes triple. Zach is quite simply willing to break the rules. He does not accept that government is the same as a household. He does understand that the government can actually create its own money. He does realise that the Bank of England does not need to actually keep interest rates as high as they are and punish us for simply being and wanting to live in our own homes, whether that's rent or mortgages, both are affected. He does understand that the City of London is not the jewel in the crown that Rachel Reeves calls it. It is, in fact, draining money from the rest of us. He does, of course, understand the environment. And behind me is the first ever book I read on that in 1974 or 5 by a chap called E.J. Mission, called The Costs of Economic Growth, and it's still imposing those costs on us now, and Zach gets that. He is too dedicated to a wealth tax in isolation for my liking, so we have a point of disagreement there, because I think there are better and cheaper and easier ways to raise money from the wealthy before we go for a wealth tax. I'm simply being pragmatic. If I can get money cheaper and more easily without political capital being expended when there are other fights to have, I go for other things. It's not, I'm saying we don't want to tax wealth. We just want to do it more easily. But this is a man who's got the vision and the courage. I mean, I knew Caroline Lucas for a long time. We were both co-founders of the Green New Deal group. We have co-authored with each other. I've known quite a lot of members of the Green and even the Ecology Party. Jonathan Porritt is an old friend of mine. So, yeah, I've gone back a long time with Green politicians, and I've never been a member of the party. But he has the courage to actually learn the lines, learn the meaning behind the lines, and talk them. And that's a massive breath of fresh air as far as I'm concerned. And for that, I'm really grateful for his existence. He's really doing something which is different. And if only I had heard the same thing, for example, from John McDonnell when I was potentially lined up to work with him at one point, where he didn't learn the lines, he didn't have the courage to deliver them, and therefore we got a policy which was, I'm afraid, less than I hoped for from John and Jeremy, and I know them both. But here we've got Zach, who's actually just willing to upset people, and that's amazing. I love it. The world is dependent upon the existence of unreasonable people for progress, and he's an unreasonable person, and that's, as far as I'm concerned, enough to sing his praises.